Today on Midnight Monster, we talk about what is the creepiest urban legend or folklore you've simply ever heard. There is 8 hand-selected stories for today's video. If you have any similar situations you would like to share, drop them down in the comment section below and let's get started with story number 1. So, I had a football coach come back in high school who was also one of my teachers for a semester. He told us one story that freaked us all out pretty bad. He had a coaching job at a small college in Montana when he was a lot younger and newly married. He said that after practice one evening, he was making his long commute home, and the route ran alongside just fields and fields of hay, grain, or whatever. Since it was late summer or early fall, it wasn't even approaching dark yet. His car was an old beat truck with just a bench seat. Anyways, he's driving along when he sees a hitchhiker on the shoulder. This being back in the day in small-town Montana, my teacher pulled over to let the guy in without a second thought. The man was described as wearing a really old, outdated style of suit. Not quite a zoot suit, but a style in similar baggy way. He also had a big, stylish hat. This guy looked like he was out of the 40s and sort of like a pimp. My teacher thought it was weird that he was so overdressed, as it was super hot outside, but maybe that was only clothing he had. So, the guy gets in next to my teacher without a word. The teacher asks him where he needs to go and the guy just points forward. So, the teacher drives on. Later, my teacher tried talking to the guy, just trying to make simple conversation, but the guy would not even speak or acknowledge him. He just pulled his hat down like he was sleeping. Out of nowhere, the guy just tips up his hat, looks out the window and says, "Stop the car now!" My teacher pulls over and lets him out, not wanting to offend a possibly crazy man. The guy stands on the side of the road for a second and then, at a dead sprint, just runs off into the field beside the road, until my teacher could not see him anymore. Granted, the crop was fairly tall. He waits there for a while, thinking maybe the guy had to run or something, and did not want to shit next to the road. After a long enough wait, my teacher gets back into the truck and starts to accelerate back onto the road. The thing about really old trucks is that they don't accelerate very fast. As my teacher got back onto the road, he looked in his rearview mirror to check for a safe merge, but there was not a car in sight. What was there was the hitchhiker on all fours like an animal, running or crawling after the truck at an inhuman speed. Meanwhile, my teacher is beginning to fishtail as he attempts to go faster. The whole time his eyes were glued to that mirror, watching the man chase after his car. Eventually, he was able to get up to speed and lose sight of the guy in his mirror. When he was able to stop at the gas station to use a payphone, he called his wife at home to tell her the story and to lock up the house. She thinks he's just messing with her and he's been talking to her coworker about the hitchhiker. When he asked why she would think that, apparently at her office in town she worked at, one of her coworkers told her a story of the same thing happening to them. And it's a well-known urban legend in that town. She thought it was just folks playing with her, the new girl at work, who had to drive home alone at night. Anyways, my teacher assured her that he was not lying and she believed him and can vouch for her side of the story, because she showed up at one of our fundraisers and I asked her about it. So yeah, now I just avoid lonely roads in Montana. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in a desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all of 2 lanes through the total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, CA. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a doormat volcano and a lava field on one side of the salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself that afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of a city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I'm driving north through the canyon, a high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes. A suitcase wide open with clothes scattered everywhere. Two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away and a hair on the back of my neck just stands up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out my 9mm pistol and a chamber in the round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it was staged. An ambush, maybe? Was I being paranoid? Something was wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was a horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies on the road. I continued for a couple of 100 feet and slowed down so I could breathe, and let my heart slow down. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the two bodies had gotten to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had slowed down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me if I've gotten out of that car to check on the bodies, or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow, I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. I live in northern Australia, and everyone growing up in my town knows of the legend of the Poinciana woman. The one I grew up to know is that a woman who was assaulted by Japanese fishermen and hung herself from a Poinciana tree when she discovered she was pregnant. She is said to appear as a beautiful woman to entice men with long dark hair, dressed in a white gown, and is said to be situated at our Army Reserve. When I was around 12 and my younger brother 10 had been in his room and I was in the lounge room on my computer, he had become barreling out of his room screaming, "You can hear that? Can you hear that? Can you hear that?" Before dragging me over to the window, there was a faint feminine moan or a hum. We could hear it moving from the window and we stood there, to one of the cross rooms and back in the clockwise direction. The wind had picked up with the noise despite how still the night had been. The sound became so loud that we were on the floor covering our ears crying. When I brought it up recently, my brother agrees it was almost as if the sound had been in our heads. This went on for about 10 minutes before abruptly stopping. No wind, nothing. We found out the next day that our older siblings had been at the Army Reserve that night before they got home, had climbed the concrete pillars to the locked gun turret, and had been taunting the Poinciana woman before they left when they heard footsteps, assuming it was security. What creeps me out the most is that not long after this happened, I realized that we had one of those trees, Poincianas, outside the window. My mom told me this story about the village where she grew up in Scotland. The village's earliest known settlement is from 3000 BC, so it's old. It's been home to the Picts and the Romans. Nowadays, there's a small woodland and the rest of the surrounding land's just farmland. The woods used to be much larger, and they are what survive of a large forest that almost surrounded the village. Legend says the forest was home to witches. When the forest was being cleared for expanding farmland, a lone witch came out of the forest to tell the villagers to stop. She said the trees would not forgive a man for their destruction, and if the villagers did not heed her words, then all their lands would become infertile, and all the women. Frightened, the villagers agreed, but asked for a small part of the forest. A deal was made that this and only this land could be cleared. The witch also said that for every harvest of every crop grown there, 1 sack of produce must be taken to the edge of the forest and left. This practice was followed for hundreds of years until the villagers abruptly tore down much of the remaining forest to grow wheat and to build a mill. Again, a strange woman came from the forest into the village and threatened those villagers. She said that they had broken the promise and would suffer. This time, the villagers took the woman and hung her. Her very last words were, "The price is now 3 sacks." The man who built the mill was scared, and after the first harvest, he took 3 sacks into the woods. Unlike his neighbors, his crops did not fail and his wife became pregnant. Always he paid the Woods their due. Before long, he was the richest man in the village and had 3 beautiful, healthy daughters. Unfortunately, the man grew greedy and thought he no longer needed to pay for his 3 sacks. The next morning, his youngest daughter went missing. The whole village came to help look for her, but the man asked his men to run the mill as normal so he did not lose money. There was soon a commotion at the mill. Some of the workers had fainted and others were crying, and some were shouting. The man came to see what was happening. A horrified worker told him that they started up the mill as normal, but blood had poured from between the stones. They had found his missing daughter. Distraught, the man sold his land and fled the village with his family. The mill was torn down, and years later a silo was built there. By 1960, the silo was ancient and crumbling. It was also rumored to be haunted either by the farmer, his daughter, or the witch. Sometimes all 3. This part is my mom's story. One day, she and her friends had a bet to see who could spend the night at the silo. One boy who was always boasting of his bravery volunteered. Between them, my mom and her friends conspired to keep this secret from their parents by lying about camping in each other's gardens. That event, the boy, John, climbed the silo loft and Mom and her friend gave him a bag of food, a blanket, and a torch. They told him that they'd be back in the morning but were planning on coming back later to frighten him. They had waited a few hours and snuck back to the silo, and alarmingly, they could hear Job sobbing and crying for help. They found him quite away from the silo, pulling himself along by his stomach. John had jumped off the silo loft and broken his ankles. He was carried back to his parents' house and taken to the hospital. After the inevitable week of punishment, my mom was allowed to visit John. She said he still looked as terrified as when she had seen him that night. She asked him what happened, and he told his parents and the doctors that he fell. But the truth was, he saw something. Not long after he left on his own, he could hear something shuffling around in the loft. He used his torch to see, but there were only empty grain bags. He tried to ignore the noise, but finally, it sounded like it was moving towards him. When he shone the torch on the grain bags again, he saw that they were crawling, dragging themselves along the floor towards him. That's why he jumped. The silo has long been demolished, but they've built homes there now. Ugh, hell no. My mom used to be friends with a kind of druggy woman. She had 2 kids, Brian and Sarah. Sarah was a really cute girl. She was in the 9th grade when I was in 2nd. Anyways, Sarah's mom was a druggie and her dad was an alcoholic, but other than that, he was a good guy and took really good care of both of his kids. The druggie mom and the alcoholic dad divorced back in the early 2000s. The dad got custody of Sarah and the mom got Brian. The dad started dating someone new soon after the divorce, and Sarah was old enough that she had a boyfriend as well. Sarah was probably 17 or 18 when this story happens. It gets pretty foggy during the night where I live during certain seasons, and one night, the dad, his girlfriend Sarah, and her boyfriend, had gone out to see a movie and a dinner at Applebee's. The dad and his new girlfriend had both gotten a little drunk, but not drunk enough to call a taxi. I live in a rural area, so people know the back roads. Long story short, the dad took a turn too quickly and plowed his car right into a tree. Sarah was knocked for a loop, but she was conscious immediately following the crash. She managed to get out of her car and she had a cut up her arm and her leg and was bleeding pretty bad. Sarah says that her dad and her boyfriend also got out of the car with her. The girlfriend was dead in the front seat. She said her dad told her that her boyfriend to go help while he tried to help his girlfriend. Sarah says that she and her boyfriend climbed the bank to the road and ran half a mile or so to the nearest house. The cops were able to follow Sarah's blood trail later. She said that she kept getting tired and falling on the road, but that her boyfriend kept helping her up and telling her not to go to sleep yet. She got to a house and knocked on the door. The people there called 911 and the paramedics got there quick enough to stop Sarah's bleeding. Sarah said she kept telling the paramedics to help her boyfriend and her dad, and they told her they were going to, but that she had to tell them where the accident was. She did. Anyways, Turns out Sarah's dad, his girlfriend, and Sarah's boyfriend died pretty much instantly when the car hit the tree. Her boyfriend had a broken neck, and the dad and the girlfriend were in the front seat and probably were crushed by the force of the car hitting the tree. When the cops and paramedics arrived, all three of them were still trapped in their seats, dead on arrival. I haven't talked to Sarah in a long time, probably in 10 years, but when we last talked, she still believed that her boyfriend's ghost saved her from bleeding out on the side of the road that cold night. So, about my 3rd year in Japan, I moved to a small town. I'm living way up in the woods north of the little town I work in. It's a narrow winding road with a river on the side and a steep mountain on the other. The road is so narrow that there are places to pull over and wait if another car is coming. One night, I'm heading home after work, keeping in mind that if I see a car heading towards me, or I have to pull over. I'm heading north with the river on my left and the mountains on my right. I get to this place where the road curves to the left and there was a big rock on the left side of the road. Right at the curve, I see car lights with a white Taurus-type car to the left of the rock, kind of over the river, coming from the other side, so I pull over to wait for them to pass. I keep waiting and waiting and waiting for them to come around the rock, which has a small shrine in it, but they never came. It's weird. But there's a few buildings up there, maybe they pulled in just as the rock obscured my vision of them. I head home without thinking much about it. Later that night, I get the munchies and the only store was back in the south in the main part of the town. So, I'm driving south this time and come to the same corner. And I see that the same white car passed the rock shrine coming north towards me. This time, I am by the buildings and I pull over and wait for him to pass. But no car comes. This is weird because on the north side there are places a car could disappear, but on the south side, there's nowhere to go. Only a steep mountain and one side of a river on the other. As I ease around the bend, nothing. No car to be seen. So, this sticks with me until one day in October and I'm teaching a culture lesson about Halloween in the local junior high school. The subject of ghosts come up and I jokingly say, "Hey, I think I saw a ghost. Do you guys know the road that goes north with a shrine in the corner of it?" Before I could finish my sentence, screams of terror from half the class. Like total panic. Girls are crying, guys are shouting, and the Japanese teacher has gone deadly white. Some are literally in the fetal position moaning, "Stop, stop," over and over. I was floored at their reaction. It seems that rock was a dangerous place but was unable to be removed because of the shrine without offending the gods there. A white car crashed into it and someone died. People freaked because there's no way I could have known about it. Buckle up, folks. Here's the only sort of urban legends, etc. that I've ever come across. One of my friends back in college lived about 20 to 25 minutes outside the town and between my college town and the neighboring small town with several of his friends. One Sunday evening at about 10 p.m., they heard an unexpected knock at the door. One of the guys checked the peephole and saw a woman. Immediately, something felt off, so he went to his room to obtain his gun and then opened the door. The woman was filthy and was disheveled and immediately pleading to come inside. Hesitantly, they let her in and asked what the fuck she was 10 miles from the next town and knocking on their door at night. This woman, albeit, frantically explained that people were looking for her because she had run away from a cult in the next town that has been systematically abusing kids for a decade. One guy tries to call her bullshit, and she proceeds to pull out a stack of creepy Polaroids of individual children that almost look like booking or intake mugshots in front of a bookcase. She told them that the cops were involved in covering it up, and they couldn't under any circumstances call them. This woman asked for a ride into town to get onto a bus so she can travel to this attorney she's been in contact with. She doesn't need money, doesn't need anything but a ride to the bus station and some sealed lips. For whatever fucking reason, my friends agreed to take her into town and drop her off at the Greyhound station. One gave her his number and said to update him when she got herself together. They drive back to their house and immediately succumb to the paranoia and agree that it would be best to call the police. A couple of sheriffs and a couple of cops from the next town over show up and question them about the woman's appearance, where they took her, what she said, etc. Well, They lie and say that they simply took her into town and dropped her off in the grocery store parking lot and make no mention of the children, the cult, etc. The cops take the report and leave, except 2 policemen from the small town come back, proceed to grill the ever-loving shit out of these guys about exactly what the woman said, where they took her, why they gave her a ride. They were aggressive, but when nobody had any information to provide them, they gave up and left. Instructions to call them, and only them if they have a similar occurrence. Never heard back from this woman, never got any visits from the cops, never saw anything in the news. First of all, this is a story I got told by a former coworker, so I don't know for sure it's just another creepypasta or if there's some truth to it. Although the guy claimed to know the person in the following story. We live in a pretty rural area and there was a nightclub and a lot of young people there visiting on the weekends. Because the next big city was just so far away, many of those visitors had to drive a while to get there. One night, a young woman did not feel so well and decided to drive home a bit earlier than her friends. She gets into her car and is on her way home. Not far away from the small town, the club was, she notices something standing on the road that she's driving on. Because there's often deer and other wild animals crossing the road, she slows down a bit and approaches the supposed animal with caution. To her surprise, it's not a deer, but a baby stroller standing there in the middle of the road. She comes to a stop against a better judgment, decides to investigate. Because what's going to happen anyways? Certainly, somebody just dumped it here. As she gets closer to the stroller, she notices the headlights of a car in the distance behind her, which gives her a weird sense of safety because she does not feel that alone in the moment. The stroller is empty after all, so she pushes it to the side of the road and gets back into her car. Since she saw the lights of the car just a moment ago, she decided to let it pass her first before hitting the road again. The vehicle approaches and to her surprise again does not pass her but comes to a stop right behind her. Both doors open almost immediately after coming to a halt, which gives her a bad feeling. So instead of waiting, she floors the gas and drives off. After a short while, she notices the same car behind her, and because of the bad feeling still lingering, she decides to take a detour to the next village, making a turn here and there just to shake them off. Slowly, panic begins to set as the car is still behind her after some time, and is now driving dangerously close and giving her light signals. This goes on for a while, and because she does not know what to do, she takes out her phone and calls her dad. After explaining the situation as well as she could, he advises her to just head home as fast as possible, and that he would leave the front door open while calling the police in the meantime. She gets home, slams the door of the car open, and rushes to the house where her parents were already waiting for. They close the door and wait for the police to arrive. A few minutes later, the doorbell rings, and instead of police, 2 worried-looking young men are standing there, asking if the girl they are following is alright. As it turns out, they were heading home as well after clubbing and saw somebody entering her car while she was pushing the stroller to the side of the road. They followed her, so the guy in the back seat could not do anything. After she stopped in front of the house, the guy jumped out as well, and they were trying to chase him down, but he got away. Nobody knows what would have happened if the 2 guys were not there at that very moment. The road where this allegedly took place is in a pretty remote area, with lots of woods around it. I think I never read about it in the papers, which is strange because I heard the police got involved. I still get creeped out every time I'm driving down the same road though, so I thought I'd share the story. Okay everyone, that was 8 creepy urban legends and folklores. If you have any to share, make sure you drop them in the comment section below. If these are the type of stories you do enjoy listening, just know, Midnight Monster releases daily videos and there's going to be plenty of topics coming. So press that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next video.